Hello, pregnant mamas out there. This is a question that I get so often. And I actually got 3 questions about this just this morning. So I decided I was just gonna go ahead and make this video. And first, I had to make a pregnant belly for my mannequin. I don't know if you can see and appreciate this 8 or 9 month pregnant belly that I made out of actually the cuttings off of the serged binds that I sell. So truly zero waste company here. So she is hugely pregnant, and we're gonna assume pretty uncomfortable, because I know after having 5 children of my own and being this pregnant that there's just an uncomfortable weight that you feel. So many mamas ask me if they can utilize their Bengkung bind while they're pregnant to help try to alleviate some of that weight and that stress on their hips, on their back. And yes, you can. Now, like I've shared in lots of other videos, there is a lot of different opinions on binding in general and especially binding when you're pregnant. As I've said in so many of my videos, it is so important to listen to your body. So I'm gonna say that especially when you're pregnant, that you really need to see what feels good. Your intention is just to maybe pull up a little bit on the belly, alleviate some of the back stress, alleviate maybe some of the tight uncomfortableness that's already happening on your belly. And you can do that, but you really need to listen to what your body likes, what feels good, because of course you're not going to want to bind tightly. That is number one most important. You're going to want to bind very loosely. Now, postpartum, yes, as tight as you can get it in a comfortable way is optimal. When you're pregnant, no, you definitely want to bind loose, and we're going to focus more on lifting up instead of tightening. So the bind is going to be doing a whole different purpose when you're pregnant than when you're postpartum. I'm going to show you 2 different ways to bind. You can be creative. I know that some mamas have done it a few different ways that, again, listening to their body is comfortable for them. It's the same principle of binding postpartum, so you're actually going to get that practice and get the feel of what you do postpartum, of course, when you're binding a lot tighter. So I'm going to use one of our zero waste serged binds for this. Part of the reason why I want to use one that's serged with the black thread is because I want you to see how the rails line up. And when I refer to the rail, you will know that it is the edges here that are serged. The other terminology that I'm going to use here is the tail, and that's going to be the shorter portion that we're going to use to actually wrap the knot around. Okay, so this will make more sense in a second, but I want you to understand the terms that I'm using first. Okay, so when you are wrapping postpartum, we usually say that the tail should be about your wingspan, about as long as your arms are. But when you're wrapping, when you're pregnant, so that you can have a little bit more flexibility with how you're wrapping, I'm going to say use twice that. So 2 wingspans. Okay, so the easiest way to do it that I've found when you're binding yourself is to actually just walk around the pile. Okay, you can actually pick up the pile and move it around your body, which is what I'm going to do when I bind this lady here, and when I bind my clients as a doula. But some people put it in a bag, and they can bring the bag around them, having all the rest of the bind contained, of course. Makes it a little bit easier. It is a lot of fabric to deal with. But we have our 2 wingspan tail on this end. So we're going to wrap. I'm holding the section that separates the tail from the rest. And I'm going to wrap it, still holding that section, with that right underneath the belly. So I'm going to wrap with the rest of the bind behind you, like this. And you're going to meet up with where your hand is holding the beginning of the tail. Okay, something to keep in mind is that the tail should always be on top. When you go to wrap the knots, just make sure the tail is on top. It will make those really pretty knots that you see, when you look at pictures of someone beautifully bound. When you're pregnant, you want to get underneath your belly. So find that spot that's comfortable underneath your belly, because you're actually going to be pulling up. Take the tail and you're going to wrap it over the rest of the bind. And then it's going to come under it and then back over it. So in essence, you're really just going over the rest of the bind, going under it and back over. You're wrapping around it one time. It's not even a knot. We just call them knots because that's what it looks like. But it's just going around the rest of the bind, this section of fabric. Now you're going to go ahead and throw that tail up over your shoulder. When you're binding postpartum, you'll probably want to hold it tight in your teeth or under your arm. But since we're not binding tight when you're pregnant, throwing it over your shoulder is perfectly fine. So you're going to take the rest and kind of fan it out so that the rails are fanned out like this, okay? That will give more surface area, of course, to hold your belly. I'm going to grab the rest of the bind and bring it around my mannequin. So we're going to take this fanned out section and bring it right behind the first one and back in front. So this is very important. You're going to want to overlap. It is okay to overlap. It is great to overlap. The more you overlap these sections, if you can see here, and I'll show you in just a second when I get this secured, it's going to be more secure in holding your belly. Now, since we're not doing it tightly, having the more overlapping is going to make it more secure. It's just going to make it hold it better without being tight, if that makes sense. So I'm going to turn this lady here, and we'll fix the rail. So you can see that we've gone over the other wrap about 3/4 or more. Now my lady here ends up here, so this is going to look kind of loose because she doesn't have the rest of the body coming down, of course. But this is going to be tighter against your body. It's not going to be very loose here, but it's not going to be tight and constricting. But we'll see as we go up a little bit further. So I've overlapped about 3/4 or more here, and that's just going to hold her more secure. All right, so here we go. We're back around to where we're going to wrap our rail. It's already up on top, so we're going to wrap it. I'm going to hope you can see here. So it's already up. We're going to come across and then have it come down and just wrap it around again and come back up. We're just literally wrapping around the rest of that bind, the extra part of the bind. Now here's where you have to be a little bit careful because you don't want a lot of space between these wraps. So make sure the only tight part you're going to have, which is not tight on your belly, is that when you wrap the tail around the excess of the bind, you do it in a way that it is close to the other knot. So these knots are touching. They're close to each other. So if you pull up, it's going to pull the other knot up. So you can give it a little tug here and make sure that it's tight. Again, that's not tight on your belly, it's tight on the rest of the bind. And then throw it back up over your shoulder again. And we're going to grab the excess part of the bind again and wrap it around, of course, overlapping again quite a bit with the rails fanned out as best you can. Come back through. And we are back again. We're just going to take it. Make sure that it's lined up with the other knots and tight with the other knots. And wrap it around the excess. Bring it back up. Throw it over your shoulder. And you can see that we have these knots here now. And they're pretty tight to each other. They're pretty close to each other. And that's what we want. And We're gonna go around again. Now that looks nice. That looks really nice. This is exactly how you bind postpartum, except of course tighter. Now, here's where a lot of women stop because they like the feel of this, and I'm gonna show you how we do this. All right, so you can take this, and where you wrapped around that section, go ahead and knot it. So instead of just wrapping around and throwing it over your shoulder, wrap it around and then pull the tail through. Okay, so in essence, you're making a knot. There is no perfect way to make this knot. So if you find one way is easier than how I just did it, go for it, okay? As long as it's comfortable and this knot is not pushing into your stomach, okay? Because a lot of times that can get uncomfortable. So the way I did it makes it flat on the inside and the bumpy part is on the outside. It's just how I found works. So in essence, this binding part, which is 4 knots, some women like 3, some women like 5, it depends on how big your belly is, are underneath your belly. They are underneath the round part of your belly. Not anywhere near your belly button yet. They're, in essence, thinking of it like a shelf underneath your belly. So now what we can do and put them up over your shoulders, okay? Again, there are a few different ways to do this as well. Some women, if you are well endowed, you can crisscross them. That way they don't get in the way of your breasts. Like that, so they kind of go in between your breasts. And some women just like it to go straight up. I preferred it straight up. I felt it laid better and helped with my stomach support a little bit better. But you can fan out the rails, okay, so that it looks really nice and clean and supports your belly on top. So you can pull up to where it's comfortable, okay? And that's again where you're going to need to listen to your body. If this knot is uncomfortable, then you can, of course, just wrap it around your belly a couple times and not knot it, and just tie it in a loose, just one-time tie, not knot, so that you don't have this digging into your skin if it is. Normally, when you start pulling up, it pulls the knot up to the point where it's really not touching so much of your belly anyway. But do you see why it's important here to keep these knots close together? Because when you pull up, you don't want a lot of space spreading the fabric out. Okay, so this will help relieve some of that extra weight. A lot of women say it helps put a little bit more weight on their shoulders and less on their lower back, less, weight coming forward. And then at this point, you can crisscross it in the back and then come back under your belly and tie it in a knot here. Some women, because at this point you might also have quite a bit excess, so the tail, there's not much left here, if you can see, after you've crisscrossed it and brought it under your belly. But there's probably about 4 yards left on the long part. So once you crisscross it, you can actually just take it, the extra, and wrap it underneath your belly for a little bit more support. So just go around underneath the knots, or spread out over the knots, and it will give you a little bit more support there until you run out of excess, and then you can go ahead and just tie it in the front, on the side, in the back, however it's comfortable for you. So this is a technique that I have found many pregnant women using, loving. It's really not constrictive on the belly all that much. So you can do different variations of it if you want to pull it and go from behind and crisscross it up front. Again, this is your preference. This is what feels good to your pregnant belly. every woman's pregnancy is different, every woman's body is different, and I found that this was the most comfortable way for me to bind and alleviate a lot of those pains when I was largely pregnant. The other way to go about it, which a lot of women also use, is to continue binding up. Again, very loosely. Now that I got that knot out and sorted, we're going to take our tail and put it back over the shoulder and bring the excess of the bind around and bring the tail around the excess, just like we did before. Back over your shoulder. Now again, overlapping a lot. We're just going to continue on all the way up. Now what a lot of women have found is it just that feeling of having the bind around their bellies feels incredible. It really helps alleviate a lot of the pains that they've been facing being pregnant. And it's not necessarily pulling up like the last technique that I showed you. It is actually pulling up slightly because we are binding upward. I implore you to try both ways. I think that, you might be surprised that one way feels quite a bit better than the other, or depending on how you feel that day. Maybe it's the weight on your back that's hurting the most one day, while another day it might be more the weight coming down, in your pelvic region and on your leg. So I really, really cannot stress enough that you need to listen to your body. It will tell you what it needs. Just know that you have to keep in mind that you have a baby in there and that you don't want to squish him or her. But we also want to give you that support to make you feel better. Make sure that you give yourself enough room to tie it. So if you're going around and around and you find, here's the excess, we probably only have about a yard. That, of course, this is going to be your last trip around. And the more you overlap, the less space you're going to get in between these knots, and the more secure it's going to be without actually getting tight. So this is it. This is all we have left over of the excess part of the bind. And that's going to meet up here with the tail so that we can knot it. And there's no perfect way to do that either. If a knot is going to hurt your belly or be uncomfortable, then you can just loosely tie it once and then tuck it in to secure it. If you tuck it into the actual bind, then you can kind of secure it in place. If a knot doesn't bother you, then go ahead and knot it up here. You can adjust the knots so that they're more centered. I think I have them pretty decent here. So try them both. They're both very, very good techniques to use. But also please be creative and see what works for you. Again, if something doesn't feel right, see if you can find an alternative. These are just suggestions, and I want you to take them and run with them because, again, everyone's body is different, and you might find a way that feels better for you, and that's great. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope this helps alleviate some of the pain that you might be feeling while you're pregnant. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer them. Listen to your body, take care of those babies, take care of yourself, and I am wishing you all a very magical and peaceful birth experience. And until next time, be well.